So the problem with punching in karate is you have original Okinawan, you have Japanese, you have American, and then you have body style. You have big, thick, strong guys who use muscle, and you have thin guys who are more wiry and use more wave. So the problem with karate is everyone calls it karate, but it's not universal. There's so many different variations of it. For example, Americans came over and decided they wanted to add kickboxing to it. So a lot of American karate is higher, and it bounces a little more, and it's a little more on the front leg. You go into some of the Okinawan styles, and they're a little more soft, and they're closed like this. You go into some of the Japanese styles, and they're much longer. It depends on what you're doing. But let me give you a baseline of how you punch. No matter what style you're taking, there is one general principle that should go over all of them. Your mass needs to transfer correctly for the power to work. If I'm just spinning in a circle, there is no weight coming to him. My weight needs to shift. If this is my point of center, my weight needs to shift for there to be power. So when I move him, as I make contact, my weight has to shift through him. I have to shift. Now, depending on how you punch will change your footwork. This is where I find a lot of people have trouble. So in the first style I took, they always taught us to go like this and plant that foot and rudder and go like this. The problem with that is your hip can only go so far, right? You're stuck to the ground. I know a lot of people that go like this, and then what they do is they lean because they've stuck that foot to the ground and they have nowhere to go. So your first level of karate that most people learn is hip. So what they do is they go like this, we open up and we throw this big hip turn and boom, like that. And there's power on that, but it's a limited punch. The reason I say that is what you're doing is you're throwing your hips out ahead and your hand travels and then your hand has to catch up and align with your hips. Otherwise it ends up like this and there's no power on it. The problem with that is if he's standing still, it's perfectly fine. But if he walks at me and I go like this, inevitably I end up jammed because it takes a long time for my hands to catch back up to my hips. So that leads us to weight shift versus big hip turn. So one of the reasons you do cat stance is because often what you're trying to do is you're trying to learn how not to put weight on that front foot right away. So if I come in like this and I transfer, and you'll notice that my hand kind of lands at the same time as my mass hits. It doesn't go mass then hand. It goes together. There's a togetherness with your mass in your hand. So when you're doing styles like this, often what you're doing is you'll see people kick, they'll plant properly, and then the hand gets out ahead a little bit. And then it lands at the same time as your mass. I'm a big fan of that one. I like that one a little better than just the big hip swing. The real good guys with this make it smaller than that. What they'll do is they'll just center their mass a little bit and they'll throw it short. So there'll be like this little tiny mass shift from foot to foot. But the reason they can get away with that is because they're not punching like most karate guys do. Most karate guys, what they do is they push when they punch. These guys are more away from the hip, but you'll see like this figure 8 type thing. So what happens is as you hit, there's like a shock and a comeback like this. So the mass transfers and rocks, like that. It's very small and subtle, but that's why the feet are close. If you bring your hip back like this, or your foot, there's no way for you to rock that hip into the motion. So when you see a lot of these stances traditionally, the reason those things are done is because you need that to do this little hip motion. Now, that being said, what if you were stuck? What if you got way out ahead? There's no way to transfer your mass. Well, there is. The difference is now instead of ruddering that foot, you have to bring the foot with you. So you can transfer the mass either way. You can transfer the mass off the front leg, where I bring my mass like this, or you can put the weight on it, sink your mass back, and transfer the mass with the back leg and bring this hip. Either way it works. It's just preference and where your feet are. It's good to know both, because sometimes you'll be on this foot, sometimes you'll be on this foot. It's good to know how both of them work. Probably one of the most advanced punches you'll see in karate, which is very rare, I've only seen a couple of these, is it's a reverse mechanic. So what happens is these guys will take the punch, and instead of coming from the hip first, they throw the body out in the hand and then everything snaps into alignment behind it. The best explanation I ever heard, it was like a train pulling a cars, right? So you start pulling and your body will line up behind the bow. So it comes out this way as opposed to this way. That one takes some time. If you spent years, and I had, going like this first, it takes a while to understand that if you get your hand out and you let the body sink and just kind of snap together at the end, that there's a ton of power on that. And it's hard for people because what they want is tension. They want to feel strong. But the reality is that kind of weakens the punch because of the alignment. So if you can actually learn to just get that hand out there and throw properly, there's a lot of juice on that thing. And then there's others, right? You see a lot of more kickboxing type karate now in the United States where they're coming like this and they're grinding from the hips, which is fine too. Karate is not one thing. Karate is so big and everyone has their own opinion and way of doing it, and that's fine. What's important is you find the mechanic that works for you, works for your body type and your psyche. So it's good to view a lot of them and play around and get kind of an idea of what you should be throwing. But just remember, every time you change a mechanic, it's important you change your feet. Every technique relies on a foot in a different place to make the hips and the mass shift properly. So if you're just trying to emulate what you think they're doing with their hands, you're missing the point if you don't add the feet to it properly also.